Before we dive into a story that will shake the very foundations of history, ask yourself, what happens when the silenced finally speak? What happens when centuries of unspoken truths demand their due? Prepare to witness a confrontation that redefined dignity and denial on the world stage. If this story resonates with the fire in your spirit, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel for more untold narratives, and comment below with your thoughts on justice and history. Now, let's begin. The air in the British Embassy in Ouagadougou had never been so thick with unspoken tension. Weeks, perhaps even months of diplomatic maneuvering had culminated in an event so improbable, so utterly unexpected, that few believed it was real. King Charles III, the reigning monarch of a former empire, had extended an official invitation to Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the fiery young leader of Burkina Faso, to attend a Commonwealth History Forum in London. The invitation itself was a masterpiece of polite diplomatic language, a parchment cloaked in the deceptive silk of civility. A celebration of shared history, it read, its elegant script belying the true intent. But Traoré, a man who had seen through countless veiled threats and hollow promises, did not miss the tone lurking beneath the words. Condescension, thinly disguised as an olive branch. It was an invitation designed not for dialogue, but for a performance of gratitude, a subtle reaffirmation of old hierarchies. The international media, ever hungry for spectacle, erupted. Will Traoré bow to the British crown? A BBC panelist sneered, the question dripping with mockery, his face a caricature of disbelief. A prominent conservative commentator from the UK, his words echoing across social media, tweeted with dismissive disdain, "He doesn't belong in those rooms." The world watched, waiting for the predictable refusal, the indignant rejection that would confirm their preconceived notions of African leaders. Yet Captain Traoré had accepted, without a moment's hesitation. His decision sent a ripple of confusion through diplomatic circles and a surge of pride through the streets of Ouagadougou. "If they want to speak of history," he declared during a terse press briefing, his voice calm but resonant, "then let us speak the full truth." It was not a threat, but a promise that would echo through the gilded halls of Buckingham Palace and across the global digital landscape. When his plane touched down at Heathrow, the reception was cold, dignified, but stiff. British officials, clad in their ceremonial best, offered greetings steeped in politeness, their smiles tight, their eyes wary. Traoré responded with a firm, unyielding nod. There was no smile on his face, no feigned warmth. He wasn't there to perform gratitude, to play the part of the grateful former subject. He was there to confront. Inside Buckingham Palace, the air was thick, heavy with the scent of colonial nostalgia. Gilded portraits of African conquests lined the corridors, their painted eyes following him, silent witnesses to a history written by the victors. Each step he took was a journey through a curated past, a narrative of glory built on plunder. When Traoré entered the ornate chamber where the first roundtable would be held, he immediately sensed the power dynamic, a palpable tension between old empire and rising independence, between a fading legacy and a burgeoning truth. King Charles, resplendent in traditional royal attire, rose from his seat, a practiced smile on his lips, and extended a hand. "Captain Traoré, welcome to Britain. We've come a long way, haven't we?" Traoré looked him straight in the eye, his gaze unwavering, piercing. "Yes," he replied, his voice low, deliberate, cutting through the polite hum of the room like a blade. The room froze. The polite smiles vanished. A few diplomats coughed awkwardly, their faces a mask of shock. Cameras clicked, their shutters echoing the sudden, deafening silence. King Charles's practiced smile faltered, then returned, forced and thin. "I suppose we'll be speaking frankly today?" "I don't know any other way," Traoré shot back, his eyes holding the king's. Outside, crowds had already gathered, a microcosm of the divided world. Some waved Union Jacks, symbols of enduring pride. Others held protest signs, stark and defiant. Africa is not yours, and apologize for empire. The stage was set, the world was watching, and the truth was about to begin its long, arduous journey. The Round Table began with a practiced civility that felt like a fragile veneer over a simmering volcano. Crystal glasses clinked softly as aides, moving with silent efficiency, passed silver trays laden with refreshments. Historians from Oxford and Cambridge, pillars of the British academic establishment, introduced the day's topic with an air of detached authority: the legacy of the empire, civilization, cooperation, and conflict. Their voices were smooth, their narratives polished, ready to guide the discussion along well-worn paths of historical interpretation. King Charles took the first turn, his voice solemn, his posture regal. "Our past," he began, his gaze sweeping across the assembled dignitaries, "is not without blemish. We acknowledge the complexities." A pause for effect. "But through colonization came infrastructure. Through our presence, literacy blossomed. We introduced the rule of law where there was once, regrettably, chaos. We brought civilization." His words, delivered with a gravitas born of inherited privilege, painted a picture of benevolent progress, of a guiding hand lifting the benighted. Captain Traoré didn't flinch. He folded his arms across his chest, his eyes fixed on the king, a silent, unblinking challenge. He waited, his stillness a counterpoint to the king's measured pronouncements. When Charles finished, the moderator, a respected academic known for his impartiality, nodded towards the Burkina leader. "Captain Traoré, your thoughts." Traoré leaned forward, his voice calm, almost deceptively soft but heavy with the weight of generations. "You speak of civilization as if it were a gift," he began, his words slow, deliberate, each one landing with precision. "But gifts are not taken by force." He glanced around the room, his eyes briefly meeting those of the British officials and historians, then returning to the king. "Your empire didn't build roads for us. It built roads to your ports, roads to extract our resources, to funnel our wealth back to your coffers. It didn't teach us law, it enforced obedience. It imposed a system designed to serve your interests, not ours." The tension in the room thickened, palpable enough to cut with a knife. A few British officials exchanged nervous glances, their polite composure cracking. One historian, his face flushed, began to interject, a protest forming on his lips, but the moderator, sensing the seismic shift in the discussion, silenced him with a firm, almost imperceptible gesture. Traoré continued, his voice rising slightly, imbued with quiet power. "You drained our land of its minerals, its fertility. You rewrote our names, forcing us to abandon our identities. You erased our languages, replacing them with yours. And now," he paused, his gaze sweeping over the king's royal attire, "you wear the jewels of our ancestors on your crowns and call it culture." King Charles took a deep breath, his forced smile now entirely gone. "You make strong claims, Captain," he said, his voice taut. "But without the institutions brought by Britain, where would Burkina Faso be today?" Traoré's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to pity, or perhaps contempt, passing through them. His reply was a single, resonant word: free. He let it hang in the air, a defiant banner. Maybe poorer, perhaps slower to industrialize, yes, but free, and on our own terms. The king sat back, his composure visibly shaken. "You're forgetting the violence within your own borders," he retorted, grasping for a familiar defense. "We didn't invent tribal conflict." "And yet," Traoré shot back, his voice now a whip crack, "you mastered it. You didn't stop division, you fed it, armed it, profited from it. You wrote divide and rule in ink and blood across our continent."
The silence that followed was deafening, a vacuum created by the sudden, brutal honesty. The moderator, visibly flustered, quickly moved the discussion forward, but the tone had irrevocably shifted. Traoré had not come to flatter, nor to perform the expected role of a grateful recipient of colonial largesse. He had come to reclaim the narrative, to strip away the polite fictions, and to lay bare the unvarnished truth. Outside, as news of Traoré's words spread online, protesters erupted in cheers. Clips of the exchange hit social media within minutes, amplified by a hungry global audience. "He said what needed to be said," one tweet declared, echoing a sentiment that had festered for centuries. Another, more succinct, simply stated, "Traoré didn't come to tea, he came to testify." By the next morning, London was divided. Headlines exploded across newspapers and digital media alike, stark and uncompromising. "Traoré challenges the crown," screamed one. "Stolen gold, stolen glory," declared another. "Burkina Faso president schools the king at Buckingham Palace," read a third, leaving no room for diplomatic ambiguity. The mood within the palace was less poetic. Charles stood in his private study, reading the Times with tight lips, his jaw clenched. Camilla entered quietly, observing his rigid posture. "He embarrassed me," he muttered, his voice low, filled with a raw humiliation. "In my own house." Camilla raised her eyebrow, her gaze knowing. Or perhaps he simply told the truth. The king didn't respond. He was watching a clip on his phone now, Traoré's piercing stare, his calm, methodical dismantling of centuries of royal mythology. Every word struck deeper than protocol allowed. While London grappled with the seismic aftershocks of the Round Table, Captain Traoré walked the halls of the old empire with quiet precision. He wasn't smiling, he wasn't gloating, he was thinking. His aide, Malik, approached with a tablet, his face a mixture of awe and urgency. "You need to see this," Malik whispered. Traoré glanced at the screen. Over 12 million views. His remarks from the summit had gone viral, exploding across African youth networks and international outlets. Even Al Jazeera, CNN, and BBC Africa ran segments titled "The Return of the Voice," when the empire was confronted. Traoré said nothing at first, his gaze distant. Then, quietly, "We're not here to make enemies. We're here to end silence." In the British Parliament, a storm was brewing. One MP, red-faced and sputtering, demanded an apology from Traoré for disrespecting a monarch. But across the room, a younger MP, a Nigerian-born member from Birmingham, rose with a calm dignity that silenced the chamber. "If telling the truth about colonial theft is disrespect," she stated, her voice clear and unwavering, "then we should question what we've built our pride on." The palace issued no official statement, a silence that spoke volumes. Yet behind closed doors, Charles summoned his private press team. His face etched with a new kind of weariness. He asked a simple, unsettling question. "How do you counter a man who speaks without fear?" No one had a clear answer. Later that evening, a BBC host, known for her sharp intellect and diplomatic finesse, invited Traoré for a televised interview. The anchor, attempting to corner him with a question dripping in polite accusation, asked, "Do you regret the way you spoke to His Majesty?" Traoré's reply was measured, soft, but sharp enough to cut. "I regret only that we waited this long to say it." The BBC interview spread like wildfire. Clips circulated across TikTok, X, and YouTube Shorts with bold overlays. "He said it to the king's face. This man just called out 400 years of silence." At Oxford, students gathered in impromptu forums, discussing colonialism not from textbooks, but from the raw living words of a contemporary leader. In Lagos, Nairobi, and Johannesburg, cafes buzzed with conversations about gold, dignity, and the rewriting of history. But not everyone applauded. At 10 Downing Street, the Prime Minister was less than amused. In a private call to the palace, he voiced concerns about a populist narrative hijacking diplomatic decorum. Charles, surprisingly, responded coldly. Perhaps decorum is the luxury of those who were never looted. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, Traoré's speech had transformed into something deeper, something far beyond a viral moment, a movement. His government announced the creation of the Gold Restoration Audit, a multinational commission to investigate mineral wealth taken during colonial rule. Scholars, economists, and legal experts from Mali, Ghana, and South Africa joined in solidarity. This isn't about revenge, Traoré explained in a national address. It's about recovery of wealth, of memory, of voice. British tabloids retaliated swiftly. The Daily Mail ran with the headline, "Traoré declares economic war on the UK." Talk show hosts mocked his accent, his uniform, even his youth. One pundit sneered, "He thinks he's sung Kara with social media." Traoré, however, never flinched. When a Sky News journalist asked, "Aren't you afraid you're damaging relations with Britain?" he looked calmly into the camera, his gaze unwavering. A relationship based on silence is not a friendship. It's obedience, and we obey no one. Behind closed doors, King Charles found himself at a crossroads. He called a meeting with historians from the Royal Collection Trust. The question on the table was simple, yet revolutionary. What would it take to return some of the gold? The room fell silent. For the first time in decades, the question wasn't if it was stolen. The question was whether they could afford to give it back, politically, economically, symbolically. One advisor finally spoke, his voice strained. "If we return it to him, others will come knocking." Charles stared out the window, watching the gray London sky. "They already are." The conversation that began with Traoré's bold retort had now swept across continents. In Jamaica, the Prime Minister made a televised statement urging Britain to open talks on reparations. In India, a member of parliament quoted Traoré's words, "You stole everything," while proposing a resolution to audit British-era resource extractions. In museums from Brussels to Berlin, curators whispered nervously, "We might be next." Meanwhile, in the British Parliament, an emergency session was held behind closed doors. Conservative MP William Eastwick stood and bellowed, "We cannot allow historical revisionists to rewrite our legacy. Britain brought order, roads, and law." Across the room, the younger MP from Birmingham calmly replied, "We also brought chains, and it's time we face that." As tension mounted, a controversial proposal hit the table. Initiate a Commonwealth-wide dialogue on colonial reparations. No promises, just conversations. Buckingham Palace, however, was growing uneasy. Public opinion polls were shifting. For the first time in years, the monarchy's image dipped below 50% favorability. The Queen Consort remained silent, but Charles felt the strain, not just from abroad, but from inside his own halls. In a quiet corner of Windsor Castle, he summoned a trusted aide. "I need to speak with him." "With President Traoré, Your Majesty?" Charles nodded, "Yes, but not on BBC. Not in front of microphones. I need to ask him what he really wants." The aide hesitated. "And if what he wants is something we cannot give?" Charles looked weary but resolved. "Then we admit it and live with the truth." That same week, an invitation reached Ouagadougou, signed not by diplomats, but by Charles himself. A private summit, neutral ground, no press. When Ibrahim Traoré received the letter, he read it once and smiled, then folded it slowly. The time had come not just for confrontation, but for clarity.
The final moment came not in a royal hall or a press conference, but in a repatriation ceremony unlike any before it. Held in Dakar, under a golden sky, world leaders gathered in silence as British officials handed over the first of many stolen artifacts, sacred masks, golden staffs, and scrolls wrapped in silk. Among them stood King Charles, no throne in sight, and beside him, once again, Ibrahim Traoré. The applause was not thunderous, it was quiet, respectful, heavy with meaning, a collective sigh of generations. Charles turned to the audience, his voice clear, if still tinged with the weight of the past. "We do this," he said, "not to erase our past, but to stop hiding behind it." Traoré stepped forward, holding one of the artifacts, a carved lion figurine taken during a colonial raid in 1896. This, he said, his voice resonant, was not a gift, it was a wound. But today, we begin to close it. The moment was broadcast live in over 50 countries. Tears flowed in living rooms across Africa, in the Caribbean, in Aboriginal communities in Australia, in descendants of empire everywhere. But in some places, London, Paris, Brussels, there was unease. If Britain gave back what it stole, what would France be asked? Or Belgium? Traoré never raised the question aloud. He didn't need to. The seed had been planted. In the days that followed, more announcements came. The Netherlands agreed to return looted art from Indonesia. Germany offered reparations for Herero genocide-era atrocities. A global rebalancing had begun, one sparked not by war, but by a soldier who chose words over weapons and a king who chose truth over denial. Back in Ouagadougou, Traoré walked through a new museum, the Hall of Return, where artifacts once scattered across empires now stood proudly on Burkinabe soil. A young girl stopped him in the hallway. She held a school notebook, pages filled with sketches of African heroes. "Are you a king too?" she asked shyly. Traoré knelt beside her, a gentle smile touching his lips. "No," he said, "I'm just someone who refused to forget." That night, as the city lights shimmered under a starlit sky, a banner hung across the capital read, "We were never silent. The world just wasn't listening." Now they were. History is not a museum. It breathes. It bleeds. It remembers. For centuries, the world told Africa to forget, to move on, to be grateful for chains recast as partnerships. But Ibrahim Traoré refused. He didn't demand revenge, he demanded truth, and received it from the most unexpected place, a king. Charles didn't fall. He stood taller the day he admitted the crown was forged with stolen gold. And in that moment, both men broke something greater than silence. They broke a cycle. This wasn't just a clash of civilizations. It was a reckoning between dignity and denial. And as two leaders stood side by side, the world was forced to answer a simple question. What kind of future are we building if we're still lying about the past? Traoré didn't just make history, he made it honest.